What happens when a global summit ends with no handshake, no agreement, and no photo? When the President of the United States waves goodbye, not from the center of global leadership, but from the steps of Air Force One, completely alone. At the 2025 G7 summit in Alberta, the usual choreography of global Canada didn't protest with words, it protested with silence. Trump detonated a 25 that sent shockwaves through markets from Tokyo to Toronto. Europe retaliated with a $150 billion counterstrike, and while America flexed its muscles, its allies quietly power. Without it, we are witnessing a turning point in history, an unspoken revolution in global leadership. So, why did Canada refuse to speak? Why did Europe turn its back on Washington? And what does this mean for the U.S. economy, the global trade system, and your future? Let's go inside and break down the full story behind the summit that shattered tradition. Alberta summit begins, the calm before the storm. On the surface, the 2025 G7 summit in Alberta opened like any other. Ceremonial greetings, polite handshakes, and the standard optimism laced with scripted diplomacy. But within hours, that calm cracked wide open. Beneath the summit's snow-capped setting, global alliances were being shaken to their core. Prime Minister Mark Carney and U.S. President Donald Trump made headlines by stating a trade security deal could be reached within 30 days, a headline that quickly unraveled into geopolitical turbulence. What unfolded next was a masterclass in passive resistance, power projection, and alliance reshuffling. Canada's silent protest. No statement, no photo. Canada's silence became the loudest message in Alberta. Prime Minister Carney refused to sign the summit's final communique, skipped the traditional family photo, and cut off any symbolic show of unity. This wasn't just diplomatic restraint. It was a calculated strategic maneuver. Why did he do it? Because Carney remembered 2018, when Trump infamously disavowed a signed agreement with a single tweet. This time, Carney denied Trump even the illusion of consensus. In an era of information warfare, this refusal was a form of reputational jujitsu. No image, no leverage. Trump's 25% tariff triggers global shock. The true explosion came when Trump announced a 25% tariff on all imported goods and a 10% surcharge on energy products. This wasn't economic protectionism, it was a landmine. It blindsided U.S. allies, tanked market sentiment, and reignited fears of a full-blown global trade war. Trump's tariff blitz wasn't about economics. It was a political play aimed at a domestic audience ahead of a tough election year. But in doing so, he fractured one of the most foundational pacts of post-World War II diplomacy, that the G7 is a club of consensus, not coercion. Viral response: Mark, stand with steel, and market panic. Canada responded swiftly and strategically. The Master Stand with Steel campaign erupted on social media and materialized in real-world supply chain shifts. Within days, workshops from Montreal to Windsor repriced all exports to the U.S., while Detroit's auto sector began issuing profit warnings. The campaign wasn't just a digital movement, it became a logistical shockwave. Canada weaponized its integration with the U.S. economy to expose the vulnerability of American manufacturing. In doing so, it forced Wall Street to reckon with Main Street's geopolitical blowback. Europe strikes back with a $150 billion Ukraine fund and green industry plan. Across the Atlantic, the EU wasn't idle. Ursula von der Leyen responded with an economic counterstrike, a $150 billion Ukraine fund, massive green industry subsidies, and a new critical minerals procurement plan. The signal was clear. If America retreats into unilateralism, Europe will forge a new path. The EU also used this moment to untether itself from Washington's whims, reinforcing its own economic and industrial sovereignty. Their message was less about confronting the U.S. and more about replacing its gravitational pull. Macron, Germany reject G9 plan with China and Russia. In the summit's closed session, Trump proposed inviting China and Russia to form a new G9. The backlash was immediate and brutal. Macron called the idea while German Chancellor Friedrich Merz dismissed it as naive appeasement. This was more than a rejection. It was an ideological firewall. France and Germany were drawing the red line between a West anchored in democratic norms and a transactional, unstable New World Order where alliances were negotiable. Domestic fallout, ICE raids, and labor crisis in the U.S. While Trump rattled allies abroad, he doubled down at home. Operation Safe Haven saw ICE agents storm neighborhoods in Chicago, detaining undocumented workers en masse. Agricultural fields, logistics hubs, and construction sites across America were immediately hit by labor shortages. Economists didn't miss the connection. Tariffs were driving up material costs and deportations were shrinking the labor pool. Inflation was now being fed from both ends of the supply chain, a combustible mix. Carney's diplomatic strategy, no repeat of 2018. Carney's playbook rejected the old NAFTA reflex of compromise at all costs. Instead, he embraced a doctrine of strategic minimalism. By denying symbolic victories to Washington and refusing to offer concessions without real rollback, Carney elevated Canada from a polite neighbor to a principled player. This was more than a message to Trump. It was a demonstration to the world that middle powers could lead without spectacle, influence without noise. Retaliation list: whiskey, Harleys, peaches, and chips. Ottawa's response wasn't limited to silence. A comprehensive retaliatory tariff list hit iconic U.S. products: Tennessee whiskey, Georgia peaches, Nebraska beef, and a range of semiconductor components. The symbolism was clear. Canada would not punch below the belt, but it would hit where it hurts. Even Canadian conservatives backed the move, showing rare bipartisan unity in confronting Washington's aggressive policies. Europe's economic counteroffensive and global trade realignment. The EU didn't stop at Ukraine. It pledged an extra $50 billion for its CHIP Act, initiated rare earth procurement from Africa, and fast-tracked a green hydrogen corridor with Canada. These weren't just projects. They were statements of independence. Europe was laying down infrastructure not just for industry, but for autonomy. It was effectively saying, we can now function without the US. A G7 with no photo and no agreement. The classic G7 family photo never happened. No agreement was signed. 4 bilateral meetings with US reps ended in gridlock. Trump, visibly irritated, departed early, offering a vague promise to sign something in Washington. The photo op that had once symbolized unity was replaced by Trump's solitary wave from Air Force One. That image, a leader without allies, defined the summit. Inflation, worker shortages, and the Fed's tightrope. The economic cost of this foreign policy was immediate. Almond harvests were delayed in California. Logistics schedules collapsed in New Jersey. Oilfield maintenance crews in Texas thinned out. Inflation, previously a whisper, became a roar. The Fed, already hesitant, now faced a paradox: raise rates to curb prices or lower them to avoid recession. Either way, Trump's trade gambit had tied the central bank's hands. Final verdict: has the U.S. lost global leadership? The Alberta summit was a rupture, not a failure. The G7 still exists, but its architecture is now multipolar. The U.S. no longer commands automatic alignment. Instead, Canada, Europe, Japan, and even India are charting paths that factor the U.S. in, but don't depend on it. Carney's refusal to sign became the summit's defining act. Not through confrontation, but through quiet resistance, he exposed the fragility of U.S. leadership. It may build a wall, but that wall is isolating. If Alberta proved anything, it's that the post-era isn't coming. It's already begun, and it started with silence.